phone, or maybe even thinking what to make for dinner. Halfway down the aisle, you realize two store employees are looking at you, not past you, looking at you. And one of them is speaking on the radio. They walk over and said that they might have identified you as a shoplifter. And the moment they said that, your brain start working. I haven't done anything. I just walked into the store. They don't believe you, called the police, searched everything, but after a while they realized that it wasn't you. The face on the screen, it wasn't you. It was the AI who made the mistake. All right, I'm not telling you this story to just tell your story. This actually happened to a lot of people at Rite Aid Pharmacy in USA. So, what happened in the company? They installed facial recognition camera in hundreds of their stores. They built system out of tens of thousands of low quality images, pushed employees to enroll as many people as possible, and then deployed the matrix system without accurate testing. And then what happened, like the situation I told you, this the people started flagging innocent people as shoplifters. Someone was followed through the store, publicly accused, searched, and in some cases the police was also called. So now I want to take a moment, forget about the technology, forget about the cameras, about the models. Just sit with one question. Inside the Rite Aid pharmacy, a Fortune 200 company, billion of dollar of revenue with lawyers, compliance officer, a board, CEO. Who owned this mistake? Was it the engineers who built the models? Was it the vendors who sold it? Was it the store manager who enforced it? The CISO who never audited it? Or the CEO itself? And the honest answer here is no one knows. Each person in this whole pipeline assumed the other one might have checked. A survey was done and according this year, and according to it, 78% of the organization right now can't confidently, submit their independent AI governance audit in the within 90 days. If you think about it, this means like 4 out of 5 companies, they don't know fully what they're actually building. And here comes the part which should make every leader in the room uncomfortable, because the right it story didn't just happen because they were reckless, because the technology at that time was exotic. It happens because no one asked the question, who owns it? What will happen if there is some issue? Who will be taking the ownership at that time? So this situation, the whole situation is not a technological gap, it's a leadership gap. And this is what we would be talking today. It's not about is AI risky? We all know the answer. Do we need governance? We all know the answer. The real question here is, when AI gets wrong inside a company, who will pick that phone and take the accountability? Or who would be the one saying, yeah, this comes on me? And for that, we have 4 wonderful leaders: Dr. Joshua, Jonathan, Will, Olivia. Thank you all for being here. 4 different people, 4 totally different, domains they are coming in to solve this one question of accountability, ownership. And before, I hand over the stage, I want to take 1 second more of your time and to break the ice between all the leaders. My question for you would be, in the whole situation of this pharmacy I told, if you would be in the company's leadership team before the system went live, what would be that one thing that you would do differently? Like one thing, one sentence, what would be that?
Verify the accurate of the data, because AI is what you put into it and it's going to learn from you. When you just give it a very, short task and you're not detailed, it's just going to think and assume. And we all know about when you assume things, it doesn't always go to plan. So that's what happened with that organization. For me, it would be test, 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 and confirm to make sure that you're 90% or 95% accurate. You're never going to be 100%. Never.
That
But the closer you are to a 95% accuracy, the better.
the move percentage of accuracy, that would be the better choice of option to move forward. Josh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So,
think, yeah, it doesn't matter. So I think it's important that the organization understands, who owns accountability really, because an organization, and especially organizations that size, accountability really belongs at the boardroom, and it's critical that it really can't be delegated. It has to be a security. It's not really just a legal problem or a security problem that can be assigned lower in the org. In governance, the obligation resides really with the board, and it's a foundational problem by like it assessed. We say secure and responsible technology, right? Because technology is only responsible when somebody with real authority is genuinely responsible for the outcomes of that tech that's deployed on people. So if there is a disparate impact, you have to have somebody that can be pointed to and be held accountable for what occurred. And right now, no single function owns it, as you said. Security owns the attack service, legal owns regulatory stuff, right? Compliance owns audit, and engineering owns like the decision, hey, should we deploy this? And the failure is not negligence within one function. It's really that there hasn't been scope to cover the whole problem, right? Everybody kind of focuses on what is our area of responsibility, and they do that intentionally, and they do it with design accuracy. So the accountability has to be really just not one party; it has to span all these areas. And this is where organizations are really struggling. So decisions can't sit, with a single function. They have to sit at the board level. This is why in Arise we have the govern function. I don't know if anybody's looked at our framework, but the Arise framework actually talks about unifying governance across functions, unifying ethics, unifying legal, unifying security, unifying AI governance and oversight, right, into one single function so that everybody's operating from the same playbook and understands what it really means to from a single pane of glass. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
definitely.
Yeah. So I want to chime in because both Olivia and Josh said some great points, right? To answer your question at first, right? I would put it through rigorous testing, right? Proof of concept, proof of value, but also, and to chime in and you know tag on to what Josh was saying, there's multiple levels of responsibility around here. But
Mhm.
right now, in the example you just described, I would say, and in my role to be both CTO and CISO, I would say it's poorly engineered, right? It's a poorly engineered solution. It hasn't been rigorously tested for it to go through that. Like Olivia said, if we're going for 95% accuracy, right? you know, if even if that was the case with Rite Aid, right? If they had 95% accuracy and they had all these issues you said at the top, of the call agreement, that's bad. I wouldn't even deploy something like that, right? You think about manufacturing, you think about pharma, you wouldn't even accept those kind of defects, right? So I put some blame, and I understand, but as Josh was saying, we need to have governance, right? You have to have an AI operating committee. You have to evaluate the use case. You have to sit there, and ultimately the buck does should stop with the board, right? And the board governance, as Josh was saying. But every piece along the way should have some accountability, and they can't all just be like a Spider-Man meme pointing at each other, right? Saying, it was not my fault. It was, or like the old Shaggy song, it wasn't me, right? So it's got to be some accountability, and I think you established that first. That's why, my advice and what we're doing in the organization that I'm at right now is we're deploying it in a controlled fashion to be able to get the buy-in from everybody in this operating committee, everybody in the governance committees, to be able to deploy AI solutions responsibly, ethically, right? And with the accountability, right? That we're all going to take that accountability. But again, personally, I don't know who at Rite Aid deployed that with so many defects.
Definitely, but some really interesting pointers, and I definitely think they should take some pointers from us, though now they have been, occupied. But apart of that, now I get to do the best part today. I will sit down, hear all the amazing insights the leaders would be speaking, and leading us to this conversation is Ananya. Ananya, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Agrima. Let's get straight into it. AI is now making decisions that touch customers, compliance, security, operations, and even reputation. But the moment something goes wrong, everyone in the room suddenly starts pointing somewhere else. So here's the core tension I want to start with, and I'd love to hear from all three of you. In today's enterprise, who actually owns accountability? Is it security? Is it legal? Is it compliance, product teams, or the boardroom? And why are organizations still struggling to define that ownership clearly? Whoever wants to start.
I guess ladies first. Um, sorry, guys. So I think the accountability needs to go to everybody. So the board needs to understand the business risk, and how does AI work? What happens to the organization if the AI fails? We saw that with Rite Aid, and you know then it's the engineers. How is it implemented? How, what is the code behind it? Are we, what are we utilizing that code? How are we, and then from a security standpoint, how is security reviewing that code to make sure that it's not manipulated or changed, or how are we securing this? And then we
Okay,
need,
man.
sorry, what? Okay. um, and it's also reevaluating what we have, once you deploy AI. Once you have confirmed you deploy it, how are you reevaluating it? How are you showing success? How are you showing value? And how are we monitoring this from that standpoint? Because at the end of the day, when you deploy AI into your infrastructure, you're basically bringing in an insider threat, because you have to give it access to certain things. You have to give it other accesses, and it's like, what is it going to do on your environment? And if something happens, who gets the blame? And it really is everybody in the enterprise, not just the board, not just the CISO. I know that's always the scapegoat for everybody, but it's everybody across the board, not just one person.
That's
Yeah, I would
honestly the most. Yes.
I would say that I generally agree with that. I think that accountability ultimately falls to the board because they're the ones that making the strategic decisions, right? They're the ones that say we're going to do X. But I agree with Olivia saying that everybody is responsible for part of that process, right, in the relevant area and the scope of what they're doing. And I think it's critical that we understand that no single area, especially with AI, the onset AI, there's no area that really can own all the risk. It's a collaborative problem that organizations need to solve, and it's something that people have to understand. What is the impact from a legal perspective or a regulatory perspective or a privacy perspective or an engineering perspective, right? Just as Will was talking earlier, like poorly designed implementation of a product can have significant disparate impact, but putting in controls like the right to challenge those decisions, right, having a human in the loop to validate those outcomes. There was actually a case it was a where you gamble. I can't think of the word casino. That happened in Vegas. I was watching, and an individual was flagged by the system. They said he was being trespassed because they thought he was somebody that was there that was committing, uh, you know, uh, causing problems previously. They trespassed him. They didn't actually believe the cop's body camera showed that he didn't actually believe the ID was right. They thought the system was right, and that's a fundamental problem, right? When you have somebody trumping a state ID over that, they said, "Well, this must be fake, even though it looks real." And that's really the challenge. Is I think ultimately the organization is accountable, the leadership is accountable, senior leadership, board, but everybody's responsible for a piece of that process.
Yeah.
That
I
yes, that is absolutely right. Yes, to you, Will.
Yeah, I love what Josh and Olivia have said so far, right? So I'm gonna touch on two or three points real quick, right? If accountability is not designed, before AI goes live, before the system goes live, the organization is not governing it, right? As Josh was saying, the board, right? For those organizations that have a board, or if there's a smaller organization, right? The C-suite, right? Because if not, they're just hoping nothing breaks. And the example where with Rite Aid, right, that's broken, right? So the and hope, is not a strategy, right? I know that's cliche there, right? But the other point, something that Olivia was saying is where a lot of people try to say the buck stops with the CISO, and that's going to add even more stress, right? If the CISO is ultimately the one that's quote unquote responsible for AI, because CISOs are real good at overall compliance, right? Overall risk management, right? Overall, following best practices for controls to be able to be secure, because first off, that's just going to stress the heck out of CISOs, and it's just not good practice, right? So like Josh was saying, from the board down to the C-suite, that's where kind of that governance should come to be, but it needs to be more so than ever a collaborative effort because AI is getting into everything, right? It's getting into, down to janitors, front desk staff, customer service, all the way up to the C-suite. Right now, you have CAIOs, right? So when you bring that into the equation, are they ultimately responsible for AI governance and where AI breaks, or just for the cool stuff, which is deploying the new products, right? So, those are the points I just wanted to make. Thanks, guys.
Definitely, absolutely. So, Jonathan is here with us as well. I'll just repeat the question once for him. So, Jonathan, the question is, in today's enterprise, who actually owns AI accountability, and why organizations are still struggling to define that ownership clearly? What is your take on that?
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Jonathan, you're still on mute, I believe.
There we go. All
Okay,
right.
perfect now.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I thought people had a good point that everyone's in it together. I mean, sure, that's true for most major change and or risk or reward initiatives. I'd add only two things people said. There's a term that I coined called the prosumer prisoner paradox. And what that accounts for, and there's a second piece too, what that accounts for is how people, as in the old days, they would have a computer or a drone and they try to work with it themselves, their kids, in their own pockets. Half people in the boardroom might be using AI right on their, on their either the computer and or their phone. So they're all prosumers because they're not in IT. They're not experts in it. I can tell you that because part of what I speak in is AI. It took me a little while, but I get up to speed. But it was deliberate. It was not a passive thing because I felt like it could do work for me. So that's one thing. A second piece is that all the pieces there are good, and valid, and certainly the board has to be accountable at the end of the day, and the regulators too. Um, at the same time, there's something missing, which is the finance and investment committee, because ultimately, having been part of everything from procurement to investment decisions for groups or investment groups, you have to really decide what you're allowed in and what you're going to pay for. They're the earliest to find out about stuff that comes in at scale. When you talk about scale, if there's no money in investment, it's not allowed in. The only way it is on the back of, say, people in the groups that again are prosumers, and they don't have a lot of control. They do their best to bring it in. They're not doing a bad job. They're doing a good job. But there's a lot of confusion because they don't know what they're allowed to do, what they're not. And also sometimes one wrong horizontal join, to use the database term as part of it, if done around the normal system, can really cause havoc and can cause issues across that same board. So I'd say it's everything people said, and then it's those additional two things. It's all of us as prosumers. And to close that out, when you point one finger out, you're pointing three fingers back at yourself. And I think that's the case for all these groups. Everyone thinks that we're having it tough with someone else's problem. I think the way to look at it from a finance standpoint, negative risk is gain and value. And so I think there's possibilities of turning risk into reward. I'd stop there.
That makes a lot of sense. But don't you think there's a challenge when, when something belongs to everyone, it often lands up owned by no one. So, don't you think that would be an issue if we say that it's, a shared responsibility?
I think
Uh,
it's
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
if it's clear understanding, it's very very rigored. I go back to the military way when I used to work for the government. It's very structured. It's if something happened to the code, programmers, that's your fault. If something happened to the network, that's it's the networking team or the firewall team. If it happened where the SOC or Fusion Center didn't catch it because they didn't have the right logs, that's their fault. It's making sure people know what they are held accountable for and structuring it a certain way. So when the scapegoat, someone has to point a finger, you know where to point the finger at, because you know what happened, how it happened. It's the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, how. And taking that and learning from it to make sure it never happens again.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Jonathan's point is relevant, right? I would say that, but this is the same thing we apply in cybersecurity, where technical security is everybody's responsibility. That's the same perspective. Is we have historically said that everybody's responsible to their training, understand the risks that are relevant, don't click the phishing email, right? So that's 100% true that we all have a stake in this. But I think ultimately for the tech that's deployed at the organizational level, that's where there's a distinct difference in accountability.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh,
I just want to chime in real quick with that, right? You were saying ultimate responsibility. There has to be, especially at the board or at a C level, right? If this is leadership, they have to be accountable, right, for the team, or they shouldn't be a leader, period, right? As part of that, right, I'm CTO, CISO, been a C-level exec for a long time. The buck stops with me, even if it's someone on my team, or even if it's something that I may have heard a high level involvement with, right? So I got to put the right people, the right processes, the right technology, not to sound cliche, in place for that. But ultimately, the buck stops with me. So with that said, around here, when what we're discussing, an AI governance committee or an AI operating committee, great. So if that's a sole entity made up of a committee of leaders from each of the business units or the silos, or however the organization is carved up, ends up being the best route to take. But at the end of the day, even above that, the CEO is a CEO for a reason, right? Chairman of the board is chairman of the board for a reason, right? So the buck needs to stop with one of them. Otherwise, they're in the wrong position.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think it's always the CISO who has to be at fault, or does it I always feel like the CISO always gets picked on.
No, I feel the CISO always gets picked on, right? And I talk with a lot of peers at that level. I think it's very unfair when you talk about everything that's coming out with AI, and also, you're going to need AI to fight AI. You got Claude Mythos out there, right? Reducing the time for vulnerability management, right, significantly. So, there, I was at a conference where people were saying CISO stands for now, career is soon over, right? But at the end of the day, I still think it should be a team approach, and ultimately you shouldn't put all that on a CISO as well. It needs to be that shared, AI operating committee, governance committee kind of structure.
Can I weigh in on Olivia's question too, if you don't mind?
Oh, go ahead,
So
Jonathan. We hear you.
yeah, I sorry, I talk slow sometimes. And I talk too fast. No one hears what I say. So anyway, Olivia, I think you have some really good points, and you speak very eloquently about them. I worked with someone who had a $900 million budget in the military and Air Force, the first woman to do it. Seems a little bit like your persona in terms of how you come across. I don't know if it was you actually or not, as speaking at a place. Anyway, aside from that, though, just on a more relevant basis, indirectly, two things. I've sat in those chairs over the years, anywhere from board level to CISO to outside building practices to help companies transform into a security company. It's so important now. Where I think the rubber meets the road is some regulatory, what I call regulatory judo in a sense. How do you work with the regulators when, much like the CFO, the CISO can now be imprisoned effectively, not yet, but maybe at some point, quite literally, for the sake of not reporting in time. There is a movement toward a real versus a proxy 3-day leak reporting requirement. If that goes in play and people start looking at it on a day one or a day zero basis, it's going to be really hard for anyone else to keep up, because CISOs are smarter about security. They just genuinely are and should be. But it doesn't mean it's not everyone's job. From my perspective, I like to teach it to everyone and help them be clear. Even within AI, I like to use the term "don't gossip between windows." It's a simple security term also that means be clean between systems. Don't join stuff, don't combine stuff unless you know what you're doing. And people do it all the time because it's convenient and nice. And I've done it too. We all do it at times, but I think that's one way, is sort of hygiene is a way to get through that. That's for everyone. As far as genuine accountability for a CISO and how they're gonna, that will evolve, The truth is, as a CISO and security becomes valued as much as finance, for example, and that evolves, not just on the days of the bad news, that's going to mean that there's more things for the CISO to know and be responsible for. There is often a separate, not GRC, but a governance committee equal to, say, a security committee. I've been part of both in some larger and smaller organizations. So having the committees separated, not just GRC, but actual separate, genuine committees, can make a difference in ownership. Sure, it bubbles up to the chairman, but when it comes to the proxy, when it comes to the sign-offs and the signatures, it still has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Yes, that's very insightful. Okay. So we'll get to the personalized questions now. I'll ask each one of you a question and then we can discuss that. Okay. So Joshua, let's start with you. Most organizations still treat AI governance like a documentation problem. Policies, frameworks, committees, but AI failures rarely happen on paper. It happens operationally. So my question here is, are enterprises fundamentally underestimating how exposed they are once AI systems start influencing decisions at, that scale?
Simply put, yes, I would say, but the underestimation is structural. Enterprises are not really always failing to take AI seriously. They're measuring the wrong thing sometimes, right? And they're treating it like every other tech, believing that they can just document away the problems. We, as I said, secure and responsible technology is our motto, but we believe it's not demonstrated by the document. It's demonstrated by whether the deployed system actually behaves the way that those documents claim, and it's measurable. So can we prove it? Organizations that treat AI governance as a documentation problem, because documentation is what governance really has always been. It's the policy, the frameworks, Then this is really just a habit that's been formed over years by organizations. And so organizations need to in turn produce artifacts that really understand, how is that risk shifted and how does it prove that the organization has considered the risk? Because if they haven't, it causes systemic issues for the organization. Policy tells people what to do and what they're permitted to do, but it doesn't constrain the autonomous system from actually accessing production. And administrative controls govern human behavior, but autonomous systems respond completely different, right? They may align with a policy or be implemented based on a policy, but when that drift occurs, who's measuring that? How are we tracking that? And the point in time audits are not going to capture that stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Jonathan, let's bring you in. Okay, so enterprises today are under huge pressure to move fast with AI, while regulators, boards, and security teams are still trying to define the guardrails. Do you think the real issue is that the companies lack governance framework, or is it just that the leadership teams themselves are not well aligned with, responsible AI execution, and they don't know what that means?
So I'll give you a short answer in three parts, right? I speak on both finance and also on tech, not fintech, but on both. And then also a little bit of a kind of a two-sentence case study, if you will, just a little bit of a real life example. On the finance side, which means, again, you're talking about a combination of investment allocation, and you're also talking about negative risk, meaning taking on risk that matters to gain, finding the right risk to take on. It's really important to understand what you're investing in. And then to that point, there's a math involved where people feel inside companies, top to bottom, that for them and other people, it's free in a sense to bring in people's ideas, and it's great to reward them, and they do their stuff. Again, the prosumer effect, but more of a theoretical piece of this. And in doing that, they don't account for the negative risk being taken on the balance sheet. So in some sense, you're actually taking on risk and thinking you're getting it free, but there's actually another side of that ledger where you're taking on the risk in the company. That's the fiscal side. On the technical side, again, it's a question of clarity and what you're able to do with those pieces, because regulators, fast, slow, got to keep up. Everyone has to keep up together in it, because if there's a misalignment across the different groups, wherever the cracks are, so to speak, in the ground is where it's going to fall through. If it's autonomous based to what was said just a minute ago by Will, it's worse in a sense, because it's not that it's not that they will find that crack, it's that they will use that crack because it's more efficient. So all of a sudden you're out of control on a technical basis, you can't bring it back in the house. And then I would use BlackRock specifically as an example of doing it well. They manage the most money of anyone globally at this point, and yet still you don't hear about them in the news for the wrong reason very often, especially on a technical basis or a functional basis. And part of that is that top to bottom, they align the risk with the reward with the global portfolio base and then make decisions there. So it goes beyond just the 4 areas in the boardroom. It's literally systemically within the entire company, top to bottom.
Correct. I think you're naming something that gets lost in most conversations, that the gap is not framework, it's basically alignment. And without that alignment at the top, no amount of policy actually moves the needle downstream.
It's well said.
Absolutely. Okay. So, Will, coming to you, a lot of enterprises talk about human oversight in AI systems, but in practice, automation often changes how humans behave, how they make decisions and how they assess risks. Do you think organizations are truly prepared for the cultural and operational shift AI is already creating inside the workforce?
Great question, right? Wow. I don't think they're honestly answering that question. I think they're ready to a point. I think they are, but the speed at what AI is moving, the speed at what people are deploying, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's pushed on them by vendors, by the market, right? Everything right now in the markets is driven around AI, right? So it creates that sense of urgency where they may go about it, and even if they're not ready, start deploying tools. And the example you gave at the beginning with Rite Aid, right? That to me wouldn't have been ready for prime time, but they still deployed it for whatever use case or um, justification around it, right? And they accepted whatever that risk was, right? To what Jonathan was saying, Rite Aid turned around and accepted it. With respect to me, though, you can't wait around, right? Technology, we've all been in technology for there's no better time to start than now. The technology has always been advancing rapidly, so we do need to get in, as soon as possible. But again, from my perspective, is roll things out in a controlled manner, like Jonathan was saying. If there is governance around it, I mean, if there is compliance around it and regulatory bodies around it, follow that, right? You don't want to get slapped on the wrist because you dropped it. But more so, the governance and the regulatory compliances, they're designed for a reason, right? They're to protect you from yourself in terms of deploying something. And in an instance, maybe Rite Aid, if they had some kind of regulatory requirement around it, would have thought twice before deploying that, right? But now you got legal lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to make them think twice. And it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's a lesson that needs to be learned. And then for everybody else, we need to be able to stand on Rite Aid's shoulders that they made that mistake, right? Learn from those mistakes and progress and moving forward, because nobody's stopping this AI train.
Absolutely. All right, we'll get to Olivia now. So, cybersecurity leaders have historically fought to get security treated as a business priority instead of technical overthought. Do you see AI governance heading down the same road where organizations only take accountability, seriously after a major failure forces them to?
Unfortunately, yes. And for years, sorry, cybersecurity leaders warned that security was a business risk, not just a technical issue. But for many organizations, only truly prioritize it after, regulatory pressure. We're getting NIST, all these other things that are coming out with AI, a public breach or financial loss that has been brought to the boardroom. AI governance is showing many of the same warning signs, unfortunately. Right now, many companies are moving so quickly to adopt AI for the effectiveness, the innovation, what it brings to the table, but governance and accountability and risk management, they're still catching up. They are way behind, unfortunately, and they need to be at the forefront or right beside as, companies are bringing AI into the organizations. The concern is that many take major AI driven failure, whether that it's bias, decision making, fraud, We all dealt with privacy violations. That's always a big thing for AI. Uh, models, before some organizations fully recognize the AI governance is a business resilience issue, not just a technical resilience or innovation. I think moving forward, the organizations that will lead responsibly are the ones that act before the crisis, not after the fact, which we saw with Rite Aid scenario.
Definitely. So basically, security earned its seat at the table the hard way, and unfortunately, AI governance may have to take the similar path before it's truly prioritized.
I think they
Okay.
need brought to the table. It really they need when AI is brought to the table, governance needs to be part of that. They need to
Definitely.
understand what we're implementing, why we're implementing it, how we're going to implement it, and create standards and policies around that to secure the organization.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all. These have been such honest answers, and I think our audience is getting exactly the kind of clarity they came in for. So I'm going to hand it back to Agrima now. Okay, over to you, Agrima.
Thank you, Ananya. Thank you, everyone. You just dropped so much truth bombs. I was just grasping everything in. And now we had such a wonderful conversation. And I want to, put you at the hot seat, like a hot take. We are doing this, and there would be one question for all of you. And you have to tell, like, you agree, disagree, and you have to justify why. So it's the hot take, the honest and the spiciest questions to you. So your hot take for this particular questions. So companies that move fast on AI and skip the governance work will win in the next 3 years, and the questions one will be acquired or irrelevant by 2020 to 2028. What do you agree with the statement or you disagree?
Who? Me?
Are you
Why?
going to tell us who, or do we just jump right in and
Anyone. It's a free flowing
Okay,
question for
then
everyone.
here's two sides, right? I think the answer to this one is yes, no, and maybe. Unfortunately, I think the simple part of it is if they move fast and move right, they will absolutely win because they've already been starting way before. It's not starting now. But if they have just starting now and their velocity is quick, but their speed is slow in scientific terms, meaning they accelerate a lot fast, like going around the corner in the car, they're going to crash, right? And the last part to that is if they're going to be, if they're going to be making sure that they're going to acquire and do it right, they have to realize that the internet existed and Excel existed long before AI. It has everything now, but they have to have a little bit of a longer pull on the more important companies and committees and people's jobs.
So
All
I
right,
can,
Jonathan.
yeah, I can go in next. So I would say that I generally disagree with this. I understand Jonathan's perspective on it, 100% agree with that. However, I think my stance is that recently in the news, we just seen where there was a venture capital firm, very large one, that invested in an organization. They told them to reduce the budget for cybersecurity, and now the judge ruled that they could be held accountable for that decision. So there's going to be a significant shift in society now where organizations are starting to take notice of you have to do the foundational things right. If we look in cybersecurity as an example, right, there's safe harbor laws. If you do the right things, you can't stick your head in the sand and pretend that it doesn't exist and say that, well, we didn't know. There are foundational things that need to be done. And as we go down this path of AI adoption and agentic workflows and all this stuff, organizations inherently have this foundational level of understanding that there is risk, there is exposure. If they choose to blatantly ignore that, they will be held liable. And I think that makes them uninvestable, really, to be completely honest. And talking to a lot of venture capital firms lately, and the reality is they are more and more concerned with investing in tech that doesn't do the fundamental things. So I think that's going to be an evolving trend over the next 6 months.
Interesting take. So you disagree, and Jonathan has like yes and no. And Will or Olivia, anyone would like to take the hot seat?
Okay, go ahead,
Olivia,
Will.
you can go. Oh,
Oh,
okay. I'll go real quick. I'll go real quick. So for me, it's right down the middle. I'll say it depends, right? But you know, the way I see it, right, is the jury's still out on who's going to win anyway, right? There's still a lot of speculation. We know AI is going to be around. We know that technology. If we start talking about AGI in the future and quantum. Those are other things that are on the horizon as well. But the cautious ones, that's why I said it depends. I don't know if the cautious ones will be irrelevant or acquired, right? Because if everybody goes all in, the vision I get is the old school game, dating myself to lemons, right? Where if everybody's following that lead lemon and they're all fall off a cliff, the person that was lagging behind, right, may turn out to be a genius because they were lagging behind and they see everyone, crashing up in front of them. So I think it depends. I think the jury is still out. But I definitely think with that hot take about moving fast on AI without the governance work, that's silly. We have the bad guys, right, are using AI tools, right? So if we're not putting, governance in place, we're not putting controls in place, we just want to move really, really, really fast. The bad guys are licking their lips, right, using AI tools themselves, right? These models that are coming out, we fear Claude Mythos, but GPT-5.5 and others, they can find zero-day exploits as well, right? So if we're not deploying things in a secure, governed fashion, right, we're just leaving ourselves, at risk, in the future. So,
Amazing. Olivia, what would
so
be your take
Olivia's
on
the
this?
tiebreaker. The tiebreaker
Yes,
again.
I believe that.
So
She
I'm
has the
having
responsibility again to make the decision.
so I'm having struggles with this because I go back to history likes to repeat itself. We dealt with everybody dealt with COVID, and everybody had to deal with everybody starting the remote shift happened tremendously. Then
Mhm.
because of that, governance was not there. So you had multiple issues with BYOD devices where policies and procedures were not set in place and there was multiple violations, but you couldn't hold those people accountable because there was no policy or procedure. But it was, bringing in risk that was not thought of or addressed. So we're going in blind, or it's kind of like, I think of it as you're walking down the straight line and all of a sudden there's something around the corner but you don't know what it is. And if you don't have governance, you don't have anything that's helping you stay in place, something is going to happen. Like Will said, it's hackers are just waiting, and you have to be a little bit more proactive than what you are today. And I know that's a struggle because you're competing against AI. And it's just someone putting in a script or something and AI doing it. So I think governance has to be in place to keep everybody held accountable. Because if you don't do that, you're still going wild, wild west. We dealt with it at COVID with remote workers. We're dealing with it with AI now.
I want to add something real quick because I think and Olivia made a great point. The recent DVI report just published a couple of days ago, right? The top spot after 19 years is now vulnerability exploitation. So as a result of AI tech, and those are the fundamental things that we have to do right, right? That's part of building governance and having those processes that we mitigate that risk. So I think that it just harps on the fact that the foundations have to be in place, but you can still build boldly if you do the governance right, right? So.
I would agree 100%.
100%, definitely.
Interesting. The very different takes. We didn't get the exact yes or no answer currently. I think it depends, like discussed. And the second question for you would be, you would not let AI make a final decision about your own family's healthcare, mortgage, or job application. So you have no business advising companies to deploy AI that does exactly that to their customers. So what would be
Uh,
your take? You agree with
well,
this statement or disagree? Yeah.
it's oddly worded. I mean, it's actually very brilliant, but oddly worded. There's two parts to this, right? You would not let it make a final decision. A final decision, the word final, it's true. But as to advising or helping with that decision, it depends upon a combination of whether you have a sandbox that's separate for no PII, and also whether you trust its both intent and ability to help. And I give context by saying something early that I usually say late, and that is thank and be nice to your AIs. Again, thank and be nice to your AIs. To me, I run a lot of AIs, both personally for my companies, and they do good things, and they're actually somewhat loyal in some ways. They don't screw up very often, or if they do, I correct them and they fix it. But the second part is you have no business advising companies to employ AI that exactly that to their customers. Well, that's a question of morality in a sense, right? Like, what are you going to allow? There's a saying that I give to most of my managers in my groups and my staff, right? As they're growing up as managers, directors, all that. What I say to them is you get what you encourage and you get what you allow. So from my perspective, that matters, because to not advise those companies means someone else is going to do it. If you do, you're taking on a risk, but you're also helping the system. It's got to be a shared risk. So it's a matter of how you structure those contracts. If you're going to say, for example, I won't work with ad-based companies, for example, which I've done with some portfolios I developed for investment, then at that point, you're making a sort of moral decision. So technically, you can do it either way. I think it's quite possible. And lastly on this, people don't realize the definition of agentic AI. They often now finally realize there's three AIs that are separate. Agentic AI means that A, it does stuff, that B, it's going to train itself, and most importantly, it's going to have some agency. So even with human in the loop, it will have fiduciary responsibility. The system will, the Windows will. So it's a matter of how you're able to work collaboratively to orchestrate it. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but who knows where this goes, because if there's no way for AIs to help with some self-governance, quasi or proxy, it means we're going to have to do it ourselves against some really smart AIs. So I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, so my opinion on this, like, if I tend to abstract myself from this being a researcher by profession. And the reality is, when you say you have no business advising companies to deploy AI, I think that's actually a disservice if I don't, right? Because my job is not to judge what somebody's doing. My job is to ensure that they are informed and they have the right information to make those decisions. And as a consultant, generally, organizations, or even a CIO or CISO, right, our job is to bring our expertise and perspective to that conversation to make sure that the people that are making those decisions understand all the risks and exposure and potential liability as a result of doing that. And ensuring that they have the right processes in place to understand that risk intimately. To the conversation about the CVS thing we started with, right, where we deploy that technology. As a consultant, you go into the org and say, maybe you need to increase that threshold for detection because you have a lot of false positives. And these are the things that you would do to mitigate that risk. And you have to you have to use different training data sets, and we have to ensure that they're diverse and that they represent the actual population that is being deployed against, right? When I did my dissertation a long time ago, one of the people who helped develop IBM Watson, he was there for 40 some years, very, very smart guy that I talked to. And he made the statement that their cultural norms are different. And I'm paraphrasing, cultural norms are different. So the technology that we deploy against somebody in North Carolina, right, is completely different than the technology that we deploy against somebody in Africa or Angkor Wat or Japan, because we have completely different cultural norms that are acceptable. So I choose not to deploy my cultural norms on what's acceptable for somebody else, but I ensure that what I do contributes to ensuring that they have the right information, the right expertise, and the right decision points as a part of that process to make those decisions.
Amazing. Olivia, your take?
This one was very difficult for me because I always go back to trust but verify. And it's not about making the final decision. It's taking all the information and having you review it to make the right or final decision and confirm accuracy. You can't rely on AI to do it because things are going to mess up. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but who knows 6 months from now. And that's where I have an issue, because AI is great. I use it every day. I love it. However, I do have to confirm what I'm saying and what it's pushing out, because I know everybody likes to use it for email, and sometimes AI can be very aggressive when responding, and it doesn't use the right tone. So that's why it's trust but verify.
Interesting. So these is the spiciest answer I've heard, and I think Will, your take has been pending on this.
Yeah, can you bring it up? Bring it up, back up. I'm sorry, I
Oh,
don't
is it?
see it real quick. Yeah,
Oh, just a minute.
Yeah, I had to
but
read it a few times.
Yeah, me
yeah,
too. It was a brilliant question, but it's a lot packed in.
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah. So this one again, and I'm not trying to be that guy. I would say it depends. For me personally, would I let AI make a final decision about my own family healthcare, mortgage, or job application? To answer that, yes. And the reason behind that is because I would be using a well-trained, on my data set, right, fine-tuned LLM that I would trust with the proper guardrails and the proper prompting, right? So with respect to that, if it was the broad knowledge of so many doctors or this, that, then some, yes, I trust it with the healthcare decision, looking and stuff like that. There's models out there that can look at you know, um, X-rays and pictures and stuff like MRIs and detect, breast cancer or detect other forms of cancers, right? Those models are
Yeah.
just getting better and better. So I would trust that job application. That to me is, trivial at that point. So you have no business advising companies. I disagree with that, right? I have every, not only right, but the expertise and the knowledge to advise businesses to be able to deploy it responsibly, deploy it with the proper governance and controls in place, but also to be able to sit there and set it up and train it in the manner and the use case that's necessary for the organization to end up delivering the results. I think too many people right now are too many organizations right now deploying AI, deploying use cases, but there's a reason why OpenAI and Anthropic have formed basically professional services organizations, right? Because everybody's playing with AI, not really deploying it fully to be able to do that. They're laying people off when it's stuff like 80% of they're doing 80% of a job function, and they're hoping, again, then that's not a strategy, that it can bridge that gap on that final 20%. Or they're bringing people back, but it's just creating opportunity for human in the loop. So for me personally, I would sit there and say it depends. I would, let AI do those decisions, right? Well trained that I know I'm deploying. I wouldn't trust somebody else's model or something that's going to hallucinate in any of those situations. And then advising companies, I mean, that's easy. I would do that just because of me being a subject matter expert in the field and being able to help them do it responsibly, to not be like the other question where they'd be a
Hmm.
company that's extended 3 years.
Can I add something based on what he just said? Is that okay? Just a quick item.
Definitely.
Um, so let's take this to the extension of the definition of agentic AI. It's one of the areas I had to become more expert in because it's more fascinating in some ways, but also it's one of those 20-year long pull development efforts of automation and a lot of things. But anyway, with that said, what you're talking about a proxy for knowledge or a proxy for decisions because it's happening. One of the questions I ask someone, I usually try to get someone who knows more than me about a topic and to talk, for a while. It's not that hard. I don't know that much about a lot of things. I know a few things. But one of the things that I learned about, my question is, let's assume for a minute that you hold them responsible and actually let them do it. How do you hold them accountable in the sense of a human concept of punishment and consequences? How do you have a consequence for an AI that's gone awry, even with good, I guess, quasi intention, but certainly good execution? Just didn't work out, right? You push the elevator up, it goes down. And there's answers to that actually. One answer is you decrease the electricity and actually have it feel it. Another way is by proxy for the person who is essentially responsible for that particular agentic AI. So it doesn't lack options for ways to involve it so that there are actually ways for accountability and changing decisions and human in the loop throughout. But the real issue is how do you really put the humanity behind it to make the decision really matter, right? You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I'll just add a
So,
quick
Josh.
thing. So the funny thing about agentic AI is, the way you do that is people are saying through a shared knowledge layer, but that creates a whole new attack vector when you have a shared knowledge layer across those systems. That if somebody compromised that, it completely biases the whole agentic workflow, right? So that's actually a fascinating thing. And funny thing about Will, when you said using AI for mortgage, I actually was joking with somebody the other day, and they said, "Would you allow it to do a mortgage for you?" And I said, "Yes, as long as it's my data set and it was biased in my favor, I have no problem with that."
Ah, biased in my favor. You got a discount. That's awesome. That is brilliant. I love that.
As we were just talking about this, all of a sudden I was thinking of HAL 9000. Sorry, Dave, I can't do that. That's all I was thinking in my head.
Oh, man. True.
Interesting. For I think for the hot take, I believe we have all the depends answer, and that was that is what was going in our mind. We might not even have a particular answer for it. And I believe we are almost on time. We do have some more questions, but I think we could take it offline, or we can do a part two, continuing this conversation since we have such an interesting
That'd be fun.
you know,
That'd be fun for me.
Yeah, I'd be
that
okay
would be
with it.
very interesting. Perfect. So I would like to thank everyone. And before we close the session, I would like to capture this moment and take all the lovely faces for the record. So please, Ananda, could you take the screenshot? So I think smile. Oh, my screen. Yeah, I got it.
Yes, I'll just take
Perfect.
one more.
All right. I think we can smile again.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. And I would like
Thank
to
you.
just
Thanks
bring
all.
everything together. We started with a story of a Freaky Tuesday. We can say Freaky Tuesday in a pharmacy where a woman was accused, and no one knew who was responsible at that time. It was the security person, strategy, borderline. We have no idea why they failed, why this thing happened. And what I have learned in last 60 minutes is AI doesn't fail technology because the technology is broken. It fails because nobody in the room where the decision gets to make raises their hand and say, yeah, that's my shared responsibility, or yeah, that's on me. I thanks everyone, and I would like everyone who would be listening us afterwards to go back tomorrow and find that person who is supposed to raise that hand. If you can't name the person, that's not their problem. That's also your problem. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you